Hi, for Learning Unit 9, we are going to talk about the government, and we are going to focus on the functions and forms of government. Government is never very far from our thoughts. We cannot drive a car, we can't vote, or build any kind of house we want and where we want, if the government said that it is not okay to do so. The government decides who is a citizen, who can work in the country, who is entitled to a pension, and the government wants to know if a child is born, who dies, how death takes place, who is married, and in Malaysia, government wants to know our race and religion. Of all these social institutions, the government alone sets the laws and has the authority to kill. Of all these social institutions, government is the one that has the power to do the most good and the most harm. Government is everywhere. Government touches our lives in a million ways. Why do we let it? Why do we need it? What is government anyways, and what is the purpose of government? Government is a basic or universal social institution which revolves around basic human needs. All humans need a daily supply of water and food and shelter from the elements. Just as important, we need to be able to live in an orderly environment and protected from outside enemies. These needs were easily satisfied when human beings lived in a small group, but when clans or tribes settle into a permanent lifestyle, a process is needed for making important decisions for the benefit of the group. Organized patterns of behavior that eventually become the institutions of the economy and the government. And these patterns are shaped by the ideologies and social values of each society. Government is the group of people who control and make decisions by using a particular system to controlling a country or a state. Government is responsible primarily for making public policy for an entire society, which is the steering mechanism for a given society. According to the Black's Law Dictionary, governments regulate the relationship among members of a society and between the society and outsiders, and have the authority to make decisions for the society. Traffic signs like this would be unnecessary when in a small village, but in a large city where there is much traffic, strict controls are needed to keep the flow of traffic orderly. When societies become large, they need direction and control provided by the institution of the government. In all societies of any size, some form of organized government develops because there is a need for an agency capable of exercising overall social control. There are 5 functions of the government. The first function is to maintaining internal order and external security. The basic job of a government is to protect its citizens against internal and external enemies. Government is the one agency that is equipped to protect a nation. The government alone possesses the power to enforce obedience to the rules that a society has established. The government alone has the means that a nation can provide to repel aggression through military. The government is to maintain internal social order and protect persons, property, and rights of citizens through police, prisons, and courts. None of our other social institutions could exist without the peace and safety that government provides. When law and order breaks down, government is unable to perform its other functions, and people become fearful, society begins to disintegrate too. Most countries have eliminated internal warfare and reduced internal violence to the extent that when conflicts arise between citizens, they are settled in an orderly and peaceful manner. When countries have not succeeded in doing this, bloodshed and destruction might tear them apart. The second function of a government is to ensuring justice. Belief in justice is universal. Every modern government professes devotion to it. All government based on popular support hope to convince people that they are being treated justly or fairly. Judges and courts exist in some form almost everywhere, and their main function is to administer justice. Concept of justice involves the relationships of groups and individuals to society and to each other. People willingly submit their private disputes for public settlement when they have faith that justice will be done. For example, someone whose home is burglared is usually willing to have the thief prosecuted in a court of law rather than seek personal revenge, as long as he is confident the courts will deal fairly with the matter. When government fails to perform this function adequately or is unable to enforce its decision, lawlessness begins to spread. The third function of a government is to safeguarding individual freedoms. Without government in some sense, there can be no organized, stable society. Without a stable society, there can be little real freedom for individuals. All governments claim to protect certain freedoms by maintaining law and order, but not all governments do so. Democratic governments go further than non-democratic governments. They accept that defense of individual freedoms is one of their primary functions. In past times, when modern democracies were just developing, government was often considered to be the enemy of freedom. Sometimes government regulations are unjustly or needlessly restrict personal freedoms. A government may be influenced by special interest groups and fail to reflect what the majority of its citizens want. Thus, individual freedoms are responsibilities as well as rights. Function number 4 of a government is to regulating individuals' action. As modern societies have developed, many groups and institutions have developed to perform various functions. Some perform important social services, but many also have selfish interests that go against the general welfare. Then government may find it necessary to regulate their activities. For example, the service utilities. If it is left to themselves, they might charge excessive prices and give poor service. So to protect the public, the government has established procedures for regulating them. The fifth function is to promoting the general welfare. Governments have always, to some degree, tried to look after the material well-being of their citizens. For example, some governments in ancient times gave aid to farmers or controlled prices. Today, the general welfare function of governments have multiplied immensely. Government provides the infrastructure that allows economic and social interactions to take place. It regulates the economy, taxes, provides and protects services to benefit individuals and groups and society generally. It prohibits certain services too. Everyone is affected by the demands of government and the benefits it provides. We leave home in a car and drive on streets and roads provided by the government. We enjoy parks set aside by government. We send children to government-supported schools. We travel overseas on a government-issued passport. We receive help from government if we are disabled. And if we are accused of breaking the law, we can be heard in a government-established court. All these serve the purpose of promoting the general welfare. Welfare activities of government also include health services, education, pensions and benefits, and public housing projects. People are more likely to support a government that shows consideration for their welfare. There has always been some debate about the kind of functions a government performs. While some functions have remained the same, other social institutions, for example, the family or the social mores, have evolved in response to social and technological change. The way governments carry out their functions has also evolved in response to these social changes. Many social functions that were once under family control are now carried out by the government. For example, education and support for the elderly through pensions. Different forms of culture have led to differences in the form of governments and differences in the way they carry out their functions. For example, the beliefs and attitudes of people that the way they behave in the family, religion and business determines the kind of government they develop and what they see as a preferred form of government. When different political ideologies meet, there is often conflict. For example, World War II was in some way a conflict between democracy and fascism. Present conflicts in the Middle East are also in some ways a conflict between different political ideologies. It is helpful to consider three different viewpoints about the nature of government. So there are three contrasting views of the nature of government. The first one is government as a necessary evil. Government follows us all through life, telling us what we can and cannot do. To drive a car, we must first pass an exam and pay for a license. Government tells us where we can park, what side of the road we can drive on, and government fines us for breaking the speed limit. The government can force us to do military service. We can only become a lawyer or a doctor by getting a license from the government. Government claims a share of what we earn through taxes. It regulates matters of morality and welfare and the affairs of families. People often complain about some of these things. Government possesses the authority to make laws and enforce them. Parents and teachers can tell you should do something and condemn you if you don't, but only government has the power to imprison you. Of all the institutions of social control, government is the most powerful and its powers are more far-reaching than any other institution. Many people feel that because of all these regulations and restrictions, government is a necessary evil. The second viewpoint is government as a positive good. It includes the ideas that government is the proper social instrument to bring the essentials of the good life to all people. Government is necessary to force us to do right when our moral weakness might lead us to do wrong. So government is more than a punisher. It is also a promoter of the common good. For example, by imposing taxes, government is able to provide welfare payments for the less fortunate, education for our children, services like roads, water, and also hospitals. The third view is government as an unnecessary evil. Marx and Stalin portrayed government as an instrument of oppression, as a way that one class can oppress another. In their view, capitalist governments were tools for the wealthy to enforce exploitation of the poor. So communists wanted to do away with capitalist governments and establish an institution run by the working people and do away with the coercive powers of government. Unfortunately, communist governments found it very hard to follow their own ideology. Another way to classify people's view about government is by how strong a role they think the government should have. For example, how much control should government have over our lives and personal freedoms? Within any society, there will be a variety of views on this. There are elements of truth in all these views about the role of government plays in society. At various times, there have been governments that have exploited the majority of the people, been exclusively concerned with restraining the unruly elements in their society, and also used positive means to promote the common good of society. There are many ways to categorize forms of government. Two primary forms are democracy and autocracy. So first we are going to look at democracy. Democracy is from the Greek word, which is demos, which means people, and kratos, which means rule. Democracy means rule of the people. Democracies are governments based on a popular vote where elections decide who will be in power. Before the 19th century, few people considered democracy desirable. But today, very few people would admit opposition to democracy. Almost every important nation claims to be democratic. Democracy means different things to different people. Many people see their own system as democratic and other system as non-democratic. Some bright sparks said, democracy is the worst form of government except for all others. There are certain common opinions and concepts about what democracy involves. So we are going to look at the characteristics of a democracy. The first characteristic is popular sovereignty, the right of individuals to select their leaders by voting for them. We use this term rather than just voting because the mere act of voting does not guarantee that the people decide who will be their leaders. Voting might be just a matter of form if the voters have no real choice among the candidates. The essential requirement for political democracy is that the people are sovereign, not a king or a class or an elite. It gives ultimate control to the people. And in order for the people to control the government, there must be freedom of speech, effective representation of the people, and free elections by which people can change the government by legal, peaceful methods. Popular sovereignty means, in effect, majority rule, though there is always going to be some conflict or tension. It works best if the majority are reasonably tolerant of different viewpoints, except where they might seriously interfere with the freedom of others. The second characteristic is democracy as the liberal tradition. Liberal government guarantees basic rights and freedoms such as the right to a trial, freedom of speech and religion and assembly, freedom to form a political opposition. The liberal tradition is considered an essential part of Western democracy. Third is democracy being a limited government. This means that individuals, groups, and associations are considered to have freedoms that in theory may not be taken away. The right to have periodically have the right to elect or reject the government. It is the right to mobilize public opinion. It is also the right to demand that the government operate within the law. For example, the police cannot search your house without having a good reason to do so. So they need a search warrant to do so. Keywords that indicate important aspects of the democratic methods are free discussion, accommodation or compromise, moderation, tolerance, and also reconciliation, which means that the majority will guarantee and respect the rights of the minorities and that it will allow the minorities the right to become the majority. It means that no goal is worth the price of sacrificing democratic methods. Every social, philosophical, and political system is based on certain assumptions about the nature of human beings. Democracy makes the following assumptions about people. Number 1, rationality. Democracy assumes that people are capable of developing a culture in which individuals have learned to listen to discussions and arguments and in which they will try to discover the truth by a rational weighing up of the evidence. They assume the people will realize they cannot get all they want from the government and that it is in everyone's interest to make compromises when necessary. And then we have equality, whereby democracy holds that all human beings should be regarded as equal, not in their abilities, but before the law and in their right to seek the good life. It does not insist that people are equal in beauty, strength, money, morals, prestige, but it does assert that all are equal in the sight of God and before the law. It follows that everyone should be given equal opportunity to take part in the political process, to vote, to hold a position, or to have opinions. Equality assumes that public laws apply equally to everyone and that there will be no favoritism, that the legal system is impartial. The third democratic concept of the individual is the primacy of the individual. Democracy as a concept and democratic governments emphasize the dignity and worth of the individual. The government exists for the individual to enhance the dignity of the individual and provide for the richest and fullest development of individuals. Freedom and equality are permitted, but not if they interfere with the freedom of others or disrupt the social order. Democracy exists in many forms. It may be direct, representative, presidential, or parliamentary. Democracy can exist in a republic or a constitutional monarchy. The second form of government is autocracy. An autocracy is a government where a single person or small group of people has unlimited power. Like democracies, autocracies come in many varieties. An example from the distant past is the Roman dictator Julius Caesar, absolute ruler of the Roman Empire. Absolute monarchies where the king was absolute ruler provide another example. Today we no longer have absolute monarchies. Instead, we have limited monarchies where the king or head of the royal family plays a ceremonial role but has little say in the governing of the country. In the 21st century, there are two types of autocracies remain. The first one is the authoritarian autocracy. An authoritarian autocracy is one in which the society is ruled by a dictator or clique, which is the small privileged group, which forbids all activities that threaten its position. An authoritarian autocracy guards its power ruthlessly. It wants to rule because it likes ruling or likes the benefit that come from ruling the enormous potential income. The second type is the totalitarian autocracy. A modern totalitarian autocracy wants to control all aspects of an individual's life. A totalitarian government seeks to control not only all economics and political matters, but the attitudes, values, and beliefs of its population. Most totalitarian governments are based on an ideology, for example communism, that allows them to justify their actions in the interest of creating a better world. Among the characteristics of an autocracy government is the loyalty to the party and the state. Totalitarian autocracies demand complete loyalty and obedience to the party and the state. If there is any conflict of interest, people must subordinate their own wishes to those of the party and the state. The second characteristic is it is ruled by leaders. Autocracies and countries differ from one another, but if the leader is unresponsive to the people, he can change the law to meet his own purpose. In these circumstances, life, liberty, and property are insecure. The third characteristic is it is a one-party monopoly. Autocracy desires control. It generally tolerates no organized opposition, but it sometimes makes use of a political party. This party may have come to power legally, but once it becomes an official control agency of the state. It offers no alternatives and doesn't allow ordinary people to participate in making public policy. The last characteristic, it is a controlled press. To maintain control and ensure support, a leader often has to control the media and the press. Propaganda is the product of the state controlling the press and structuring the flow of information to the people in such a way that it makes the state look good. The people are denied the chance to hear the other side of an issue. So sometimes autocracies look as if they have a lot of support. How do autocracies justify their forms of government? They use arguments like, we need to keep control to stop the repressive effects of the market. They also argue that if they were not in charge, some other group that is much less caring about the country would take over. They also said that they are the caretakers until democracy can be properly established. The next argument is that the country is not yet ready for democracy. The people are not educated or experienced enough for democracy to work. Actually, there is some truth in these arguments. Modern democracies were developed to reflect Western cultural values and institutions, and these do not always transplant well into another cultural context. It is also difficult to make democracy work well in countries with two or more separate and opposing cultures. Classifying a country as an autocracy does not mean it is bad. It simply means it is not responsive to the will of the people the way democracies are. Autocrats do not expect people to know what is good for them. They tell them. But an autocracy may or may not act in contradiction to the will of its people. They can also listen to the people and carry out popular wishes. Actually, many autocracies claim to be democracies. Governments are far from simple, and there is an art to government. The goals of a government may remain the same, but the way those goals are achieved varies with changing times.